you don't have to have the answers, but you do need to create the space for people to do their own work. And so a lot of our work isn't deliberating between two religions. It's giving the space for people to learn about each other.
Well, welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore how religion is lived. I'm your host, Elaine Howard Eklund. I'm a sociologist and director of the Baniak Institute at Rice University. Today, we're going to talk about religion and the pursuit of tolerance, understanding, peace, and more, particularly in Oman and the Middle East, where our guest currently lives and works. I'm joined by Reverend Justin Meyers. He's the executive director of the Amana Centre in Oman. Before moving there in 2013, he was a pastor of churches in Schenectady, New York, and Queens, New York City for 10 years in the Reformed Church in America. We'll talk more specifically about the work of the center in a moment, but briefly, the Amana Centre is an ecumenical Christian interfaith organization working to facilitate interfaith dialogue and peace building between Christians and Muslims through interfaith tours, study abroad programs, interfaith conferences, and much more. I got acquainted with your work, Justin, when a colleague presented a research project that you'd been on, and said, you've got to go ahead and meet this person. He's amazing. He's doing really good work that's right up the alley of what you're doing at the Baniak Institute. So it's been super fun to get to know you over the past year or so, and really glad that you're here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I'll just jump right in if that's okay. So You've spent more than a decade living and working in Oman. And what first drew you there? Maybe just tell us a little bit. And how has that experience really changed perhaps the way you think about faith and community?
Yeah, I think initially it drew me because I was asked. I had no idea where Oman was. In New York City, I did a lot of work with interfaith initiatives, especially around justice and homeless issues. And so somebody in my denomination said, we have an opening in Oman, would you consider going? And I thought, my wife will never agree to this. And she said, okay, let's go.
All right.
But it's very important to me because my father's sister, I've learned to say my uncle, but my father's sister married a Lebanese immigrant. And so I've had Muslims in my family since I was in their wedding at 5. And so growing up with them, and I remember when 9/11 happened, my uncle, who's works for a prominent company, said, he'd been working with people for 15 years and they treated him differently on 9/12. And I remember in seminary, I was in a world religions course and none of my classmates had ever spoken to a Muslim. And so I took my video camera to Thanksgiving dinner and I interviewed my uncle about his faith so they could actually hear a Muslim talk about his faith. And that was kind of my first foray into having people speak for themselves about their faith.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
And I think that's what drew me. And Oman, now the Amana Centre, we are an ecumenical, but also not interfaith. Our associate director is now an Omani Muslim person. So we've moved kind of just beyond just Christians running around Oman to, Christians and Muslims running around, working not just with Muslims and Christians, but now any religion and culture that needs to learn about each other.
Fantastic. So you really came by it rightly through your own background. It sounds like your background was a real gift and that, I guess made you open to something that maybe other people in your shoes wouldn't be open to. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
So probably some of our listeners, I imagine, most of whom are in the U.S. and Europe, don't know very much about Oman. And so I wonder from your perspective, what makes Oman's religious landscape distinct within the Gulf region? And I've heard you talk about this before, and I loved hearing you talk about it, so I want my listeners to hear that too. But what makes the country's cultural setting especially conducive to interfaith dialogue?
Yeah. So Oman officially is the only Ibadi majority Islamic country in the world. And so most people have heard of Sunni and Shia, but the Ibadis are a historic tradition. They would say that their tradition goes before the Sunni-Shia split. And so in Oman, there are Sunni and Shia and Ibadi all living together. And when I first came to Oman, they talked about Ibadism a lot. But over the time, they've really wanted to talk about Islam in Oman. And so it's actually impolite to ask somebody, are you Sunni, are you Shia, are you Ibadi? I have two Muslim colleagues on staff, and I've been friends with one for 13 years, and the other's father and I are good friends. And so I know their religious traditions. And it was in a meeting. I said, yeah, Muhammad is Ibadi and Ali is Sunni. And like, oh, we didn't know that. They'd worked together for years and they never talked about what their background was. And I also think, Oman, living in the middle of the Gulf, their official foreign policy is friends of everybody, enemies of no one. But they make a distinction between being friends with them and condoning actions, and so they would say, we don't condone this action, but, we still are friends with them and what's best for them.
So it sounds like culturally there's this sense where there's a propensity towards the common. Is that right?
There is. And again, it's a harsh landscape, especially in the interior of Oman. And you've always had to work around water. And whatever differences you have, you still have to work around water. They were a seafaring country. And so they're at one time, the Omani Empire extended into Iran and down the east coast of Africa. And they were trading with India and China. And so, they've also been a very metropolitan on the coast. And again, tolerance is good for business. The Dutch who founded New York, New Amsterdam, recognized that too, is that tolerance is good for business.
I love that. And it's fun. Some of my listeners and colleagues, I think, would be concerned about that because it sounds very functional, but I don't really have a problem with that. I feel like there's sometimes multiple reasons that people do things or have the propensities that they do. And
correct.
Teaching a group or learning from a group, the sort of functional reasons something happens is almost as important as convincing them of more substantive reasons or cultural reasons.
Correct. But even in the Ibadi tradition, it's always been a minority tradition, and so they've learned to be tolerant of each other, and they would never, if they disagree, they would never tell you that you think they're wrong. They'll disagree with you and they'll make their case, but they'll never criticize your position.
Yeah.
And that's not hospitable, and they're very concerned about hospitality.
That's really neat. So you were kind enough to share a draft with us of something you wrote for Substack, and you discuss, how Omanis take the long view of time, spanning dynasties, lifetimes, and even centuries, which I think is pretty neat to be exposed to that for our listeners. I would say in the U.S. here, we do not take the long view of time. No. This is laughably, we do not take the long view of time, and sadly. But how has that different kind of outlook really changed or shaped your work at the center?
Yeah, when I came, I was a hot-headed New Yorker. And, I wanted to move fast and do stuff. And they kept saying to me, shway, slow down, Justin, slow down. Just slow down, step by step. And, they just are not, they're not, it's hot. You don't move fast. You conserve your energy. You think things through because things take a long time. So if you make a decision, you want to make sure it's the right decision. And so, their current dynasty is the Sultan's family has been in power for longer than the United States has been a country. Sultan Qaboos ruled for 50 years. It's just they have a 2040 plan. They think in 20-year chunks and planning out for their country. It just adds that kind of stability. They don't make decisions quickly. I think there's some missed opportunities that they miss, but in the long term too, they don't shoot themselves in the foot either. And it's just part of their slow, deliberate nature that I've come to appreciate. And so if you do something, it's built on relationship and trust, and those relationships take time. What are their motives? What's your long range goal? Is this really for the benefit of the community, or is it the benefit for yourself? And so they've really taught me that just take the moment to breathe, learn about us, let us learn about you. Everything starts with coffee and dates. If you come into the office of somebody and you start with business right away, it doesn't work. You have to spend the 5-10 minutes of just doing the relational stuff. If you greet somebody, it's a long greeting. How are you? How's the weather? How's your family? How's your work? How's your health? There's a whole litany that you have to go through before you can actually get to the business. And so Westerners get impatient, and they've taught me really just to slow down and work on the relationship before you work on the transaction. Work on understanding the other before offering anything. Even in their their life. They're very hesitant to mediate. They won't try to tell people what's right or wrong, but they will facilitate people doing their work. And so it's taught me you don't have to have the answers, but you do need to create the space for people to do their own work. And so a lot of our work isn't deliberating between two religions. It's giving the space for people to learn about each other.
That's really beautifully put. And I feel like I've never been to Oman, sadly, but
Well, you're welcome anytime.
I know. I certainly could learn an enormous amount from what you're saying. I mean, even in the academy, we say that we prize slow reflection, and that's the very last way that we live, right? So I tried, I'm a firm believer in slowing down and reflection, but I think sadly Americans have very few tools to really do that. And so it's neat to, a funny story about me is a mentor once told me to slow down, and my husband just laughed because I had a slow down plan that was in 10-minute increments. And he said, there you go with your aggressive rest. So that there's just so much we can learn from that. So
yeah.
In the transition from just mere, what I might think of as mere tolerance to actual hospitality, what does that shift require of us, and what does that look like from your experience?
Yeah, I think it requires us becoming uncomfortable. I think initially it's very hard to enter somebody else's space. I think as a foreigner coming in, right, this is not my space, I can't dictate it. And so I had to learn to actually receive the Omani hospitality as it was offered. And also realize too that their definition is different than mine. I have my best friend here, Mohammed, our associate director. I've never met his mother. And we joke about this, because I'm allowed in the front room, but I'm not allowed back in the family rooms, right? And this is part of the culture. And he has best friends in Oman that he's never been past they call it the modulus. And so it's very welcoming, this modulus, but there's a limit versus where in America, we think hospitality is you're welcome to the kitchen, we show you the bedroom, the living room, we show off our whole house. But getting in the front door of American houses is very hard. But getting in the front door of an Omani house is very easy. So I think part of it is learning then not just to accept the other, but how do you actually live into the space, and how do you offer that space back? So I was privileged to bring Mohammed to the United States with a group of Omani students from Salt Caboose University a couple of years ago. And at the end of the trip, I had Mohammed stay in my house and eat with my parents. And he was actually in my brother's old bedroom. And he suggested, I could never offer this to you in the same way you've offered this to me. And so it was this uncomfortableness, but this beauty too at the same time of recognizing that what hospitality meant to each of us was both good and valid for our cultures, but it did mean something different. And I think it's that uncomfortableness of learning not just how to give it, but how to receive it, because it has to feel like hospitality. And I think, how do you, and that shift has to come from tolerance. It's not just tolerance is like, I'll exist with you. Hospitality requires you to actually dig deep and understand. And the motives behind it, right? And so why can't I go back in the house? How are you so rude that you won't let me, see your kitchen? And for him, it was really uncomfortable for us to walk in and walk through the kitchen and past the living room into the back bedrooms. It took that uncomfortableness, but then he received, the hospitality of my parents, and it's just one of those moments that changed both of us. But it's going just from existence to opening yourself up to the danger, and danger is not the right word, but the world shakingness of allowing the other to offer you something that you couldn't offer the other even. And I think that scares us because, we live in such a transactional world that, if you give me this, I have to give you in reciprocal.
That's right.
But hospitality actually is you giving somebody something they can't give themselves. And receiving something that you can't pay for. And I think it's a hard step for people because it means you're no longer self-reliant. And I think that's really hard, especially for Westerners. It goes beyond relying on yourself, your own understanding, but opening up yourself to somebody else's understanding of the world.
And I imagine for you, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I imagine there was a relinquishing of control moving into a new situation. Yeah, it sounds like that's just scratching the surface of what it was a relinquishing
Well,
of.
yeah, I mean, it's not my country, right? It's not my world. It's not my culture. I'm 6'5". I tower over people. I'm a white dude who's learned to talk slower when I'm here. I am ambitious in some ways. I want to make change. I want to help people be better in this world. And the Omani's like, yeah, we do too, but just take your time. It's just that, and it's not, there are things that I can't do here because it's not my country. And I think I've learned then to rely on my Omani friends for the things that I can't do myself here. And it's hard. It's really hard. But once you get to do it, you realize how beautiful it can be, even though it still remains frustrating from time to time.
We're in a world, and you're probably even more aware of this than I am for sure, where religion is often tied to conflict and division. And so what lessons from Oman and from the center might be most urgent for the global community to learn right now?
Yeah. It's not your role to fix others.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even we see that in our mission history. So I'm reading a lot of our mission history books as we're getting them translated into Arabic, and I'm reading this, and the amount of things they thought they needed to fix as Western Christians in a Arab Muslim culture is just amazing. They had all the answers to what ails them, and I think the beauty was is they recognized that they didn't have to have all the answers. And I think as I watch the news and countries think they have the answers for other countries is really frustrating for me. Watching American and Western history in the region, we've broken a lot of things. And I can understand the need to now want to fix that every part of it, but what I've learned from the Omanis is, it's not your role to fix something inside somebody else's country. But how would we give them the space or the resources to work on it themselves? I think this is what I would say to Western countries that really want to fix the other countries. It's just, how would you not fix it for them, but how do you give them the resources and space to allow them to fix it themselves? And unfortunately, that's going to cost time. It's going to cost lives in some instances. But I think if you do force it, more lives will be lost, more time will be wasted. And it seems counterintuitive. We want to fix it. We want the violence to stop right away. But if you don't do it in a way that the people as a community can buy into it, you're just waiting for more violence and more conflict down the road. And so as a fixer, I want to run into burning buildings and fix everything. I've learned not to run into the building, but help the people get their hoses and put it out themselves.
There's a lot to take in what you just said. Yeah, it's really a hard time. I think our listeners are probably too unfamiliar with the idea of covenantal pluralism.
Yeah.
How do you explain it? Why is it more powerful than, say, simply seeking common ground?
Yeah, I think for me, covenantal pluralism means that you acknowledge and actually work with difference, rather than just seeking the common ground. I mean, common ground is a place to start, but if we don't recognize we're different, I mean, as much as I've lived in Oman and my Omani friends say you're more Omani each day, there's parts of me that aren't Omani. There's parts of Oman that I don't agree with, that I don't like living with, but I recognize, that it's part of this covenant of you get to be you and I get to be me. We can acknowledge what is common and work around what's common, but how do we also at least acknowledge and appreciate the differences, even if they're not a thing that we could adopt for ourselves? And I think that's one of the moves that Oman has taught me is just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's different. I mean, the conversations we have around polygamy at times, especially some of our Nigerian friends that come, it's not a universal idea that polygamy it's maybe allowed, but it's not best. And some people think it's needed. And I try to encourage people, don't judge marriage based on Western standards. Listen to why Omanis get married. Listen to why Nigerians get married. What's the reason behind it, before you judge it, because they have a very different view of what marriage is. It's primarily a contract for the benefit of society and families. It's not about, at least historically, it hasn't been about feelings or emotions in the same way. Some of that's creeping in as they watch our movies and our TV. It's shifting. It's fascinating to watch. But again, until you understand the why, don't judge based on your why, here for their why.
So, what's rising to the top to me is that like polarization seems like almost a default now, especially in the West. Yeah.
Well, and I would say, just to go back to covenantal pluralism says we agree to live with our difference. We don't all have to be alike. At the heart of that's common ground says, let's just find what's all alike and let's focus on that because that's easy. Covenantal pluralism says we are different, we're going to be different, and we promise to allow each other to be different as we work for the common good. And I think it's a much more powerful way to go forward than just try to figure out the bare minimum to live together. I don't want to give up who I completely am. I mean, I like who I am most days. My Amani friends like the way they are, but my marriage looks different than my friend Mohammed's marriage. That's okay.
Do you have ways of attracting people to this idea of covenantal pluralism or practices that you suggest people start to embody or ways of thinking, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think for a lot of it, it's just having a curiosity mindset. I think instead of judging right away, be curious. Why is that difference important to you? Why is that thing that I don't understand important to you? What is your history with it? Is this always been this way? And keep asking questions. And I think for me, that's just living here. When people hear me speak about Islam and what I know, like, how do you know so much? Have you been to school? I haven't had any formal education in Islam. I just I try to ask a lot of questions and go, why is that? Even some mundane stuff that I won't get on recording by, but I've asked some like really stupid questions and people are like, yeah, we have this answer for it. And it's, at first they're like, why would you ask that? And they go, oh yeah, I never thought about it. And it's just, then it becomes a fun thing and you actually get to understand their thought process. And it's really quite normal, even though we're just like, that wouldn't work where I'm from.
Yeah. So you outline the movement from avoiding conflict, right? I don't know how to even articulate this the right way, but there's a sense that I noticed in American society where people are at once, trying to seek out polarization, like they're trying to judge where another person is coming from so they can fit them in a particular kind of category. And there's weird, things, people don't have mixed identities anymore, like at least in the kind of ideal typical way of looking at the world. Like, you are this set of things and that means that you're left-leaning, and you're this set of things and that means that you're right-leaning. And that to me seems very different than conflict, right? So conflict seems about interaction to some extent. So, I mean, I don't know. I wonder how you think about avoiding conflict, to the movement from avoiding conflict to embodying shalom or salam. And what does that deeper piece mean to you, and what is that based on?
I mean, part of the pastoral understanding of people's lives are messy. Life is messy. Peace is messy. I got into a conversation with a family member and like, I thought you were in peace building, but you're stirring up, discussion. This idea that peace is everything being calm, we have this idea that peace is the absence of conflict. And actually, I studied Johann Geltung's stuff, right? And he has this notion of negative peace is where you settle for absence of violence. And it covers up this positive peace, which has elements of justice and atonement and how do you repair what's been done? And in order to repair, you have to actually get to the hurts. You have to explore the conflict. You have to say, why are people so angry about this? Why did people vote for this person rather than this person? My favorite stories is as a missionary who's supported by churches and by people in the United States to do my work here. I get to travel around, and I was with this couple in Iowa in the middle of farm country, so there's no hotel. So I'm staying with this couple. And they knew that I was formerly a pastor in New York City, and that, that I now lived and worked with Muslims, and I don't try to convert them. And they're deep in this farm country. They've maybe left their town a couple times, their state once. And they opened up. We're talking theology. We're talking politics. And we're at the end of dinner, the wife goes to me, she goes, "I can tell we don't agree on theology or politics. But I think you understand us." And I didn't think that was possible. And I think for me, if you don't avoid the conflict, and if you don't judge, especially right away, and you are curious and you can reflect back, well, yeah, I get why you think it this way, and can articulate for him. It was one of those beautiful moments. The next morning, she handed me a separate personal check, said, "Use this for the work." And so it's this notion that just because we had different political and even theological, some ideologies, that we couldn't also work for a common good other ways. And even though we didn't agree, to communicate that we understand is, I think, one of the other big parts of this is we, in America especially, in America, we don't communicate that we understand the other person. We're so concerned with having our voice heard, our point being made, and we keep thinking that if we explain it well enough or loud enough, everyone will agree with us, and that's just not going to happen. And so how do we live with that reality that life will be messy? We're not going, somebody from New York City is not going to agree with a lot of things from a farmer in Iowa. But how do we at least let them know, I see you, I value you, we can continue to disagree, but we can enjoy this meal together, and we can leave as friends. Even though we're going to still work for these different values that we have. But I don't think they wished me harm. I didn't wish them harm. In fact, quite the opposite. We wanted what's best for our country, for our world. And they could, so even though we didn't agree, I think they understood me.
Yeah,
and it's one of, I think that for me is at the key of what Amana tries to do is we're not asking you to agree with what Muslims believe or what Christians believe. What we do ask is that you attempt your hardest to understand why and where they're coming from, and why it's important to them that they believe what they believe.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, you can make a judgment of it later, but I think by the end of the day, whatever judgment you have, you realize it's not going to make anything better. And so Ibadis don't judge; they keep it to themselves. They might tell you they don't think you're right, but they'll never say it to you because that's not hospitable. And I think that's at the end too, is just because you can say something doesn't mean you should. Just because you're right, you don't need to tell somebody. That there are higher values than being correct.
So if you could leave our listeners with one practice to, how can I put this, really begin embodying peace in their own communities, what would it be? Or I'll let you have two, like one or two practices. Yeah.
First of all, be kind to yourself. You don't have to solve the world's problems. It doesn't take an extraordinary movement to change the world. That if you want to embody peace, it can be done in ordinary things. One of our biggest tools is having a meal together. It's just, we have a meal together. And then in that is just to be curious. Don't be afraid to ask silly questions. Don't be afraid to seem like a fool. I've been a fool many times in Oman, and they have been gracious and patient with me. And I think that's the other part, is being kind to others as they're exploring. They don't know you. Let them get to know you. Let the guard down enough. So be kind to yourself and be kind to others long enough that you can actually hear each other.
Beautiful, beautiful. Is there anything else about your work or life that you want to make sure and communicate to our listeners?
Yeah, it takes time and allow people to change. One of the things living abroad is I went back to a meeting with our denomination, and it was like 5 years of being in Oman. They're like, you changed.
Yeah.
The other thing would be just allow people to change, right? And so often, if you said something 20 years ago, that they think that's who you are. This stuff that I'm saying to you, Justin of 15 years ago would be like, what's that dude talking about? The person you see now is not the person who said stupid stuff 15 years ago. It's not the person who got into online debates about everything. I've changed, and I hope others change too. And I want to allow them that freedom to change. So even people that you might have known 5 years ago, if you haven't seen them, give them the opportunity to have changed and allow them to think differently than they did when you first met them.
Yeah. If our listeners want to know more about you or your work, where can they find you?
I go to alamanacentre.org, but we're much more active on our Instagram and Facebook pages, and you can sign up for our newsletter. We tell our stories of our participants in our newsletter, so you can hear from them what their time and their work in Oman has done with them. I don't want to say our work because they're the ones doing the work.
Thank you. I feel like even in this conversation, you're embodying some of those practices that we just talked about. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate your work.
Likewise, I appreciate what Rice's and the Bonek Institute is doing. I think, we need places that are going to be places to explore these issues and these questions. So thank you for allowing us a voice with your podcast.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. Well, that's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to, rate, or review us wherever you listen. And my special thanks to our guest, Justin Meyers. Today's show was written by myself and Haley Hemstreet. Our series is produced by 3 Wire Creative. Religion Unmuted is a joint venture of the Bonek Institute for the Study and Advancement of Religious Tolerance and the Religion and Public Life Center at Rice University. I'm Elaine Howard Eklund. Until next time.